and I'm gonna skim through some parts of this. I have found an electronic copy of this book that was written. It's Alan Sturm, ALLANSTURM, ULO's Unidentified Lunar Objects, and that's the name of this book. It's not in print that I can find anywhere, but you can find it digitally if you look really, really hard. But this digital copy that I found has pretty big segments of it just completely removed, like all the photos removed. So that's weird, but uh, yeah. So we're gonna skim through some of this stuff. And it says that he has 16 years. Alan Storm, the author, has 16 years of graphic design and photography, and that he basically got bored. Curiosity led me to search the internet for examples of what others claimed they had found, he said. So um, it says that he started looking through different objects. It says, zoomed in and cruising around in high resolution, I started to see things that didn't make sense. Near perfect white hexagons on near crater edges, linear white lines over crater cracks that ended with a cross, and strange rocks and close up photos of rubble that looked more manufactured than natural. A few lunar geology books and searching the internet didn't shed any scientific light on these strange objects. No one but the conspiracy theorists had described anything like what I was seeing. Was I really seeing evidence of artificial structures and objects on the moon? Among the array of lunar anomaly websites, I surfed onto Glenn Steckling's website. It's on screen. I don't think that website is still up, but you more than welcome to try. From the revised edition of his father's book titled We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon, first published in 1981. In 1981 was my second year of high school selling computer parts part-time. Here was Fred, Glenn's father, publishing a lengthy, in-depth analysis claiming that if they would take the time to look, they too would see artificial structures and other signs on the intelligent activity on the moon. I contacted Glenn in hopes that he would speak to a live audience at my virtual island in Second Life, but our conversation quickly turned as I shared with him the odd things I had been finding. Up to this point, I had only seen odd shapes and probably some tricks of the shadows, but Glenn was patient with my excitement and encouraged me to do more research. Glenn was convinced, and he wasn't alone. His book was an excellent resource and encouraged me to dig deeper. A couple more stimulating conversations with Glenn and a dozen more geometric shapes and clusters later, I decided to shift focus of the book from a coffee table eye candy to a lunar anomalies I was discovering. I needed an angle that would give me a better chance of finding something that possibly went unnoticed for 3 decades, so I decided to focus on the Hasselblad medium format and 35mm Nikon images. I had watched on YouTube the Disclosure Project. There's a claim by some that anything alien looking had been airbrushed out of Apollo photos. Having learned airbrush back in advertising art school, I surmised that if a cover-up was indeed true, it wouldn't be smart to look through the lunar orbiter mission photos. These photos were taken nearly straight down to the surface, and if someone wanted to, they could easily paint over anything odd, and who would know the difference? You can't see these objects from Earth even with the biggest telescope. Luckily, a large number of the medium format and 35mm images were taken at oblique angles, often showing the horizon. It would be exponentially harder to fake an area's appearance, especially if there was a couple photos of the same area from different angles. I started to see more objects than before, and when there were multiple angles available, I could get better determine if the objects were illusions, the result of my naturally constructive mind tricking me with shadows and highlights, or if they really were dimensional objects. And so he's saying that he was debunking himself from pareidolia, which is really important because pareidolia is real. That's just like where your brain makes connections and patterns that aren't really there, like in audio or visual stuff. Like if you're looking at a tree, and let's just say somebody takes a picture of it or something, and you're looking at the picture, and you see a face in the branches or something like that, or a grain in the wood, that's just, your brain putting together these patterns. Like if you see a face in the wood, that could be considered pareidolia, or hearing stuff that isn't there in sound audio clips. And for somebody like me or anybody who's trying to do real investigative work on the paranormal, since that's a real thing, you have to be able to, or at least try to, differentiate between real stuff and pareidolia, especially with audio EVP. And that's why there's different classes and whatnot. But it can be visual or it can be audio. So he's trying to debunk that and being wary of it, which is really good, because I was literally just listening to somebody recently that was saying that they don't do any sort of pareidolia debunking, and I didn't like that. You're kind of debunking yourself how can you be credible if you're not gonna try to debunk pareidolia from yourself? So I consider that extremely important. So it's really good that he talked about that at the beginning here. And it says, at one point, I sat back and gazed at these amazing high-resolution photos and remembered that the moon doesn't have an atmosphere like we have here on Earth. On Earth, objects farther away tend to lose their color and detail as a result of light being scattered through moisture and particulates in the air, an effect known as atmospheric haze. With no atmosphere on the moon, and therefore no haze, the only issue the oblique angles should have, besides lens flare, camera shake, incorrect exposure, and coherent backscattering, is that the details of features seen out on the horizon would be obscured by the grain of the film. By example of this obscuration effect can be easily produced with the digital camera. Take a low megapixel digital photo looking down a highway with billboards at some distance, you won't be able to read the words. There just won't be enough pixels to recreate the letters at the size. In contrast, the Hasselblad cameras used during the Apollo missions had incredible optics and used medium format film having at best a 25 megapixel equivalent resolution. That's huge. So the pictures should have like approximately 25 megapixel resolution. And we usually get like 1, maybe, or 0.5. Something like that, or even less. More resolution of the same area photographed equals more detail, and that's a good thing, considering that most of the full frame images in this book were taken approximately 80 to 114 kilometers away. So, to continue on, it says, again, no atmospheric haze. Good lenses and high-quality film should equal spectacular detail, except for objects obscured by the film grain that are too small and far away. But wait, I'm not standing in the dark room making prints. I'm looking at these images on my computer. The digital versions of these photos came in 2 forms, compressed and uncompressed. Compression schemes like JPEG are fine for emailing smiley pictures to friends and family, but aren't good for details in photography. Basically, JPEGing clumps up neighboring pixel colors that are similar, creating larger and larger blocks until you are either satisfied with the new file size or you can still identify details, whichever is more important. So basically, these pictures are so big that people put them through like data processing, information processing software type of thing that will compress the data down smaller, and in that process, it's also reducing the visual quality of the photo by like clumping together pixels, it's saying, and you get larger and larger clumps, and that will reduce the file size but will also reduce the quality of the image. So when you're talking about really, really, really big images, you have to compress it down a whole lot, and then you get really big blobs of blur. So why can't we have the uncompressed versions? Like, even if they're difficult to handle and like transfer or whatever, like it still could be possible. But it's just extremely rare that we get them. And whenever I was younger, that's what I saw was these. It talked about 25 megapixel. I think the pictures I saw were even bigger than that. Like, you could just zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom forever. I'm not sure how big it would be. Like maybe 50 or more. I mean, it was massive. I wish that we had like this guy here, the author, to talk about the size differences of that, since he spent 16 years in photography. But it says that the whole process is further complicated by the quality of the scanning devices, its software, and operator skill. For the most part, digital images I was receiving from LPI and others were of reasonably high quality, and some were not. And says, given a quality photo and scan, detail from a medium format positive should be jumping out like Ansel Adams himself taking the photograph. I became frustrated with many of the print resolution versions of earlier Apollo missions that I downloaded from the online archive at LPI. They suffered from overcompression or missing image data, which had me scratching my head. What had me scratching my head the most was why so many of them showed signs of being compressed, resized, converted to high resolution, and then compressed again. It would be easy to jump to conspiratorial conclusions, but LPI's sole purpose is not to provide the masses with museum-quality digital images of the moon. In the meantime, I would have to account for digital artifacts and poor quality scans in hopes for better versions in the future. The good news is LPI has recently begun making new scans available. Arizona State University is also scanning, but the digital version of Hasselblad photos won't be available for years. And this is published like 10, 20 years ago. So I've heard that this guy got scared into not talking anymore and not releasing another book. So, and there's no physical copies of this book that I can find. And it says, with that said, the conspiracy theorists will be happy to know, if they didn't already, that the Apollo 8 photographic mission was altered while in orbit. Instead of focusing on the near side of the moon, they ended up taking more photos of the far side than originally scheduled. I personally found these photos to be some of the more provocative. The moon takes on a whole different appearance on the far side of the moon. And I wish that someone would take time to rescan the original Hasselblad film instead of redistributing copies of copies of copies. Most people examining these photographs are lunar planetary scientists and not alien structure hunters. Scientists and other researchers use these photos for all kinds of purposes, to include counting, measuring craters, and attempting to determine the age of the moon. They are not looking for alien bases, Nazi outposts, or secret pre-1970s Russian facilities. The resolution and the effects of compression in these digital versions are adequate for most scientific research. So I continued examining what was available and singling out suspicious, artificial-looking geometric shapes. And then I saw it. It says that it was 2 o'clock in the morning and that he had been looking through photos and found something. And basically over here on the right is showing this process that he uses to graphically illustrate the structures on the moon. And he does a good job of it in that some of this stuff you won't see right away, but after he like points it out or even just isolates it, you don't even have to draw over it and like highlight it and stuff. Just isolating it, you start to see stuff. Like these wheels on the moon right here with this like bridge thing. I mean, you can see the shadow of it hanging down. That's another thing that is really important with the pictures that I saw was you couldn't see. Some of the pictures were edited. That's another thing that I needed to mention. That I'm glad that he brought up the airbrushing, and this was like the editing that I saw looked more digital. I will say maybe it was airbrushed, and then they did something else afterwards. But what they had done was called, let me look up the term. Oh, I remember. Mosaic censoring. That's what I had seen really clearly. These like pixelizations. They had done a mosaic pixelization and then blurred it over it. And you could literally see the brush strokes from the person's cursor, like the mouse, from the software they were using. So I think that some of the pictures that I had seen were more recent than Apollo missions, but it had some of these in it. Like it was a giant folder with a whole bunch of different photos of all different types and all different sizes and showing all sorts of different stuff. But I've now come to realize that some of them were older, and that's what this book and TV show shows. It was the older ones. And the newer ones, hopefully we will see them sometime. But so some of the structures were blurred and censored, but the shadows were not. And here you can see that even though the structures aren't blurred, sometimes the shadows also give definition to the structure, like this overhanging bridge thing here. It kind of looks like a nail or like a claw, like the nail of a claw, and you can see the shadow behind it. And then you have these 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 spheres with holes in them. They look like cogs, like giant metal cogs or wheels, kind of like a wagon wheel. I think that's actually what they named this photo. Now that I say wagon wheel, pretty sure that photo is named that. So we'll start to scroll through here, but so here it has human structures ancient, and like I said, parts of this book have been completely removed, which I found to be frustrating. Like some of the page numbers are right, like it goes from 13 to 14, but like we have right here, page 16 is completely blank. So it's just literally been removed. And yeah, a lot of the best photos were just completely removed from this electronic copy, which is really weird. But so these are ancient pictures, or they're aerial photos of ancient megastructures that ancient humans have made. Okay. So I'm not sure why this page of the book was removed, but I can tell you, because I've looked at this book multiple times, that there was another page with these pictures, and it showed these pictures with this software process that he like blurs it and then sharpens it again after the blurring to replicate what these Apollo structures look like. And they end up looking exactly the same. And he takes, I think it was the ziggurat and the one of these other ones, to an anthropologist, and he has the moon photos and the earth photos next to one another, and he asks the lady, like, tell me what your thoughts are of these pictures. And she goes to say that like they're both like obviously human structures, and that they're probably like related or have like similar building type of techniques or something like that. And then he says that this one's on the moon and this one's like an ancient structure, ancient ziggurat. And then she's like, well, now I can't say that those are human, and I just can say like I don't know what they are, but I won't say that they're human now that you've told me that it's on the moon. So like this anthropologist immediately retracted her statement as soon as he said that this is a photo from the moon. So that's not in this book. I think that might be this page right here that's removed. That's frustrating, but I remember it, so I'll let you know. But this is human modern structures of like what it looks like from above. So just kind of remember, especially this mining pit one with like all the driving tracks and like the conveyor belt that takes this stuff. Kennedy Space Center with all the shadows. You see how tall some of this stuff is. And then the diamond mine, that circle. So you see those shapes, and then we're going to start going through the photos here.
We saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, admits a UFO seemingly tracked the spacecraft from a relatively close distance. Although he persistently denies allegations that he and fellow astronaut Neil Armstrong encountered aliens on the moon, other former members of NASA say otherwise.
There have been a lot of rumors about what actually took place during the lunar mission while Neil and Buzz were on the lunar surface back at the Johnson Space Center. During a couple of minutes of broken communication, Neil switched over to the medical channel to speak directly with the chief medical officer of the mission. And at that, the comment was, he says, they're here, they're parked around the rim of the crater, and they're watching us.
Interestingly, the late Neil Armstrong made cryptic comments at the White House in 1994 for the 25th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission that have made many people wonder if a cover-up might be involved.
We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief.
I've always wondered why Neil Armstrong mentioned something about pulling back a veil of secrecy in science and truth in that press conference on the 25th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing. I mean, I have no idea what he was referencing, and I don't think we'll ever know.
Yet another NASA mission, the one ET believer Edgar Mitchell was on, might have filmed the definitive evidence of aliens on the moon.
The Apollo 14 mission was a really pivotal mission. Most people don't realize that only 2 of the astronauts were actually walked on the surface of the moon, and the other one stayed on board in the command module and continued to circle around and around the moon and taking film strips and photographs, so we were completely covering all of the backside of the moon.
Back on Earth, the footage was shown to one of NASA's top astronomers. During the viewing, an extraordinary sequence came on screen.
The command module is coming around the backside of the moon with the cameras rolling, and there's like a cluster of 5 little domes with light shining inside, and there was one of them that looked like a column of steam or something projected up from the top. So there was something really there. I can guarantee you it was certainly something that was not a natural occurrence on the moon.
But when the footage was played again the next day for NASA engineers, the key section with the mysterious domes had somehow disappeared.
I took the film out, and there was no splices, there were no cuts, and all the holes lined up. That means within 24 hours, they had to have taken the film out, cut the portion out, made a copy, airbrushed it out, spliced it back in, and then made a duplicate of it and had it available to him.
Such accusations that NASA has routinely airbrushed out evidence of alien activity acquired during its space missions has swirled for decades. But skeptics are not so easily convinced.
If a NASA photo manager told me that he had screened Apollo 14 footage for astronomers that had shown some sort of glowing lights on the moon, that then that section of the film was spliced out, I would wonder whether the film was damaged. I would wonder if there was a reason that the film had to be tampered with. I wouldn't necessarily say it's covering up aliens.
But NASA might have had motivation to cover up ET artifacts on the moon. Prior to the Apollo missions, a Brookings Institution report warned NASA officials that such a discovery of an ET presence would result in nothing short of the disintegration of society as we know it.
If you think back to the jellyfish preliminary UAP video I did, I mentioned a bunch of movies that all were super pro threat, super pro war, that the aliens are coming to invade us. Yet throughout this whole TV show, the people are constantly just saying over and over, if the aliens wanted to hurt us, then they would do it with this like snap of their fingers or a blink of their eye. So if that's true, then why are we still here? How is it this Schrodinger's threat, that they're both a threat and not a threat? Because we haven't been destroyed by them, so they're not that big of a threat, I would say. But they say that they can, so it's like they are both a threat and not a threat. They get the best of both worlds. But I am calling some BS on the fact that all of our media is so pro-war. And you see that in all of the corporate media, whether it's TV or whatever form you're looking at. Everybody always tells you that war is inevitable. We have to go and fight. We have to kill. We have to get ready. Steel yourself. Give us all of your money and be afraid of this guy and don't think about it. Don't think about what we're telling us or telling you. Just be afraid and don't think about it and give us your money. Basically is what it comes down to for the war on terrorism, the war on drugs, the war on aliens. I'm sure there's many, many other examples, but it's just endless.